Good morning and welcome to the latest episode of the Turn It Round the Corner podcast. For episode 23, I'm kindly joined by Tom Connolly. Tom Connolly has written and published a beautiful book called Fair Game. I want to speak to Tom about his newfound passion, I would say, for non-league football and why he wrote the book. And yeah, just an in-depth discussion about this beautiful book he put together. So, Tom, how are you?
Very well, thanks, Christian. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you. So, before we start on Fair Game, you are an author, and you've written numerous books. Why write a book about football? Firstly, what was it? What was your passion behind that?
Well, the fact it's a photography book, obviously, with a bit of writing in there. And before I started writing novels, and now I write a lot of non-fiction as well. I spent many years in filmmaking, and I was missing having a camera to my eye.
Yeah.
Um, I used to do a lot of camera work and camera operating within my role, and I miss that. It's the only side of filmmaking I miss, to be honest.
Yeah.
And so I was looking for a little project, and at the same time, I mean, I've always watched a bit of non-league and obviously played football myself. Um, but I was watching my nephew who was playing for clubs like Lingfield and Lancing, and it really got me back into it. And it was a landscape that obviously I just loved and recognized. And so I started looking for a club to maybe just follow around for a year or two and just take some photographs and see if there was a book in it.
So why Eastbourne then, Tom? Tell me how did you land at Eastbourne?
I'm Although I don't live, I live about an hour from Eastbourne, but
Okay.
I'm Sussex, and I was just sort of looking around, asking people about interesting clubs, going to a few clubs like Hassocks, yeah, Lancing, like I said. I mean, all over the place, Dorking, to watch my nephew a bit. And then someone said you should go down to Eastbourne Town. I played against Borough
Yeah.
when I was playing, played against Lewis, but I didn't know Eastbourne Town. I'd say, Christian, that honestly, to begin with, a big draw was their ultras. Their Eastbourne's a brilliant club, and I'll tell you all about it. But it's when I went there as as an outsider, um, it is less the case now. But there was a big, very noisy, colourful band of younger fans called the Peer Pressure, the Ultras, with a very, very excellent set of social values, against racism, against homophobia, and they made a lot of noise. And obviously, to a photographer, that was, pretty interesting. So I started going to a few games. But the real thing about Eastbourne Town, the first drew me in was the then chairman, David Jenkins. He was a big part of the draw. He's just, non-league very well, and you come across these people who are just brilliant, brilliant people, totally ingrained with the football club. I mean, he was selling programs at Eastbourne Town when he was a sort of 10, 11-year old. He's a very good bloke, likes to laugh, he's very well respected, and he just made me so welcome, introduced me to a couple of other key people. Um, and I just started hanging out there and David told people what I was doing, that I was going to be there, that I was a sort of guest of the club. And I just started going to games with my camera and shooting non-posed photographs, very much kind of
Yeah.
documentary style photos. And I just loved it. So I went to a lot of games and just was made very welcome. Loved watching the football. I mean, we can get on to the draw of football and Premier League versus non-league, but the standard of football is very, very watchable.
Yeah. Well, I think obviously we've had conversations in the past, and you know that I'm a massive advocate and lover of non-league football. I think it's just really authentic, and whatever game you go to, you're always normally close to the players. And having played it and taken my son to it from literally when he was in a pram, you just get that lovely feeling around non-league football. You mentioned a couple of clubs there, obviously Eastbourne Borough and Dorking that are obviously doing really well this season in Conference South. Um, but for Eastbourne Town, anyone that doesn't know, give me an update on them and what league they play in, and how does that sort of compare in, if you know, in the pyramid, and yeah,
Yeah.
just start with them as a club.
Well, Eastbourne Town are the oldest football club in Sussex, oldest senior
Okay.
football club in Sussex. And they're now in the Isthmian League Southeast
So
Division
yeah,
because
okay.
season before last we got promoted. I mean, I'm going to caveat this, Christian was saying, I Eastbourne Town are my non-league club.
Yeah,
I don't help. I'm not involved. I'm just a fan. And
cool.
I have periods where I can go to quite a few games and then periods like now where I haven't been to a game for over 2 months just because of work and family.
Yeah.
So I really love talking about Eastbourne Town, but I think it's really important that I don't try and pretend that I'm some, you know, there when there are so many people there who have been making that club work and making it work brilliantly for decades, But and obviously you'll know your kind of draw to a Premier League club or a non-league club is very personal. So one of the things that I love about Eastbourne Town is the ground. They play at a place called the Saffrons, where you've got bowling greens cheek by jowl with the football pitch, with the cricket pitch, with the hockey pitch. And at certain times of year, beginning and end of season, you stand on the terrace at Eastbourne Town and literally over your shoulder, there's bowling greens full of play. You can hear a cricket match going on the other side of the pitch,
Brilliant.
sort of clanking of hockey sticks. I love that. I love the ground. They're now, we've got a very young manager, a guy called Jude McDonald. He had been at Whitehawk, came to
Okay.
us in 2022. And my understanding of it is that, we lost quite a few players just because of how little money we have as a club to pay people. And so he did a massive job in bringing up the young guys from the under 21s. And in 20, where are we now? 23, 24 season, we went on a 18 game unbeaten run to finish second in the league
Well,
and went through the playoffs, beat Hassocks in the playoffs, beat New Haven in the playoff final at our place, which was just fantastic. So we're back in the Isthmian Football League, Southeast Division. A lot of people expecting them to struggle or go down, but the reality is that we're very comfortably mid-table. And you asked me what I love about non-league football. To see a young team with a really young manager just working and gelling, and you can see them growing and developing in front of your eyes. It's just nothing like it. In the same way that one of the things I still love about Arsenal is what we all love about our pro teams, a player coming through. You hear about him, you see him scoring goals or performing well in the youth team. Then you see them, Nwaneri, Saka, you see them make their debut. There's nothing better.
yeah, agreed. So I think before that we'd spoken about this, and before I'd read the book and looked at the pictures, I remember watching. As I say, I started this podcast. I'm very much a football geek. If I'm not watching football live, or watching games online, or out and about, or coaching, then I'll watch stupid programs on YouTube about football, and I watched about 10 last night. But I remember watching something about Eastbourne Town, and it might have been something on Copper 90 or something about the ultras that they've got, and it got some really favourable press. So do you want to talk to me about the crowd at Eastbourne, and why it's such a good place to go and watch a game?
Yeah, it's pretty interesting because I mean, Eastbourne is there's quite a lot of more elderly people living in Eastbourne. It's quite famous for its got retirement homes and care homes and stuff. And there's also, when I first started going to watch Eastbourne Town around 2019, like I say, this. band of sort of younger, in the main younger fans who really brought a whole other atmosphere, very boisterous atmosphere to it. Really brilliant. Sometimes certain games, a big old number of them, a lot of colour, a lot of smoke, a lot of drums, and really very definite, as you see in the book, commitment to social equality, social values, no prejudice in football. And one of the things I'm sort of most, sort of fond of about the book is that some people talked very frankly, although, we keep the writing in the book down to a minimum, and hopefully the photography tells the stories about the fact that involvement in a local football club can be life changing. It can save your mental health. It can give your life a real shape. And I think what peer pressure and the ultras and the club as a whole, but what they in particular succeeded in doing was making a whole load of people who would not necessarily have thought they'd feel welcome or comfortable at football, not just feel comfortable there, but love going there. And people say to me, I just found my own people there. Um, I'm talking slightly in the past tense because there is less of that. I don't mean less of the good social values. I mean just less of those fans there at the moment. I guess it comes and goes, ebbs and flows. And you're also talking about people who move around because of college and work. But so you've got that, and then there's the absolute diehard people who have been supporting that club for decades and decades and decades. All the people that work to make that club work. And I found myself in quite an early stage walking in there, and there's just people who start recognizing you because you've been to 5 or 6 games and saying hello to you. I was made incredibly welcome. They're a very, very special bunch of people, and to me, it's everything. It's everything that there's still a lot, and we can talk about it. I absolutely love about all football and Premier League football, but the missing bits that are the kind of real connection you felt to a club in the 70s and 80s when I was first taken to Arsenal and other grounds by my dad. That's what you find in a good non-league team. It's just the best place to walk into and see a few familiar faces and watch some really, really good football.
No, and I couldn't agree more. Like as I say, you've got your Arsenal background. I support Leighton Orient, but I'll always, I'm from Harlow. I don't live there anymore. Like I've always, I've always followed Harlow. Like and my friends as well. When we was growing up, we'd always go to watch Harlow, and you'd go and watch their big games. And like my commitments are normally with other football on a Saturday, but if it is ever there's a game, sorry, ever there's a week when I'm free, then I'm always drawn back to first game I'll look at is who Harlow have got. And that's, as you say, because of that attachment, right? It's somewhere that you live, you've seen the same familiar faces, it's that homely feel. And probably the same as Eastbourne, right? Like I will go, oh, I think I went to a game between the Christmas and New Year period. I watched Harlow. There's still faces that I recognise from like going there as a schoolboy, like in and playing there, and like I've had a long involvement with Harlow, but you see the same people all the time. So, Tom, with those, before we get onto the Arsenal side of things, like those people that are watching Eastbourne, are they, would you call them, I know obviously they've got the Ultras tag, but are they like diehards? Are they just watching Eastbourne, or what happens a lot with non-league is that like their second team? So if a Brighton or someone's away, they'll go and watch Eastbourne. How does that work? Or is the core group there watching Eastbourne home and away every week?
Well, my impression is that of the ultras and peer pressure, which is a really small part of Eastbourne support, just to emphasise, in terms of numbers, that a lot of them talk to me about having this is how they got into football. They didn't have a Premier League team. This is what drew them into football. But then you've got guys who, so one guy in particular, he's a Villa fan and has very little opportunity to get up there. Lots of people of your generation talked about being priced out of football, and that's how they found Eastbourne Town or their
Yeah.
local club. But I can't speak for the majority of the Eastbourne fans are are not peer pressure, not the ultras. They're the people who've been supporting them for decades. There's lots of chit chat on the terraces about Brighton scores. There's certainly you see a West Ham shirt there or whatever. I don't know. What I get the impression is that most of the people going there who I see whenever I'm there really don't miss a game, don't miss an Eastbourne Town game. So if they are going to see Premier League football or Championship football, I think it takes a second place to Eastbourne Town.
Right. That's good to hear. But like for you then, Tom, if we flip it a little bit, like Eastbourne to you come as sort of a second love. So your first love was Arsenal. Talk to me about how how you found Arsenal and how you got to support them.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting what you say about you still you're Leighton Orient fan, but you still got that connection to Harlow and your non-league club. That this is slightly answering the question from a sort of roundabout angle, but I have no connection with Eastbourne as a town at all,
Right.
apart from through going to Eastbourne Town Football Club. And so it was something else for me that took me to non-league. And there was something about, I mean, I just love the club. I think they do things really, really well. But there was something about the landscape of that ground and club that, fun enough, reminded me of professional football, Division One football when I was a kid and first started going. My impression, however, this is sort of accurate to different degrees, but in the 70s and 80s, going to Arsenal, we used to go to Portman Road quite a lot, to Ipswich on holidays, and certain other stadiums, went to Millwall a lot because it was the nearest ground to our house, that they felt like very just slightly bigger, better run amateur football clubs. It didn't feel like it now belonged to a totally different planet to lower league football, whether it's professional or amateur.
Agreed.
And that was one of the things that I loved about Eastbourne Town. Um, my I'm an Arsenal fan because my dad was an Arsenal fan. He was um, born and raised in Ilford, and he had a period, he told me, when he'd watch West Ham and Arsenal because they alternated home matches. And he went off to war as a very young lad. And when he got back, he kind of decided he needed to follow a club, and he chose Arsenal, which obviously I'm eternally grateful for. Um, but yeah, so he always went, and there was never any discussion. The whole family were raised Arsenal fans, and he took me to a few games at Millwall because, like I said, it was closer to us in Kent, and then took me to my first Arsenal game when I was 6. We were pretty awful. It was a couple of years after we'd won the double in '71. I went to Arsenal for about 5 years before I ever saw them score 2 goals in a game. Um, and I love the stadium. I mean, it's a subject I have to edit myself on, or you'll need to edit me on. A huge part of I discovered when we moved, I'm still an Arsenal season ticket holder. I love Arsenal. I still have the same emotional reaction to watching them or listening to them on the radio. But what I discovered was that Highbury Stadium was a huge part of it for me. Um, I loved it. I think quite a lot of people who aren't Arsenal fans loved Highbury Stadium, just recognised that it was a bit of a special place. Um, I absolutely loved going there. We used to go in the West Stand when I was a kid, when my parents would take us up. My first season ticket was in the Lower East Stand, then moved on to the North Bank. Stood on the North Bank as a kid with my brother Pip when I was allowed to go up there. I loved that stadium, and a lot of it was about that. A lot of I realised that whilst there are many things about modern football and some of the modern Arsenal teams that have just been fantastic, the stadium was a big part of my love for the club.
So did that? did that wane then? Would you say not? As I say, you've said quite adamantly like how much you still watch Arsenal and you still go and see ticket etc. But did you find after the move to the Emirates, Tom, did you find that waning in any way, or like it was that like the first step of just feeling a little bit less unfulfilled, I suppose, or was that the first step in just not feeling the same? Because Premiership football has changed massively, as you said, even from just going about just getting a ticket. Back in the day, I remember as a kid living in Harlow, there was lots of teams that we could all go and watch. And if I was to take Spurs as an example, where it was probably the closest Division One team then or Premier League now team to us, you could just turn up on the day, get a ticket, roll in. Like, would you say that that move was the first step in feeling just not the same about your football club?
Yeah, I think it is. I mean, I think I would. You kind of asked me on conversation we had about, would you advise people who haven't been to non-league football to
Yeah,
try it? I
yeah,
mean, I'd say to people who haven't been to non-league football but follow a championship or Premier League team to do both.
mm,
Go and look at some non-league football alongside the football you watch because I can't imagine anyone not falling in love with it.
yeah,
And the reason I say that is I think that the all the feeling and passion and kind of belonging, we all kind of feel a sense of belonging to our football club that I had with Arsenal for many years and all the time we were at Highbury, I now get from non-league football and following Arsenal from a kind of balance of the two. I think the ground, and this is a personal thing, yeah, the new stadium is superb, and there are arguments there for um, it being a necessity, not a choice. I don't think my personal kind of opinion on it is of any sort of relevance whatsoever. But I'm aware of the fact that if I had the choice between Arsenal at the Emirates and us being a mid-table team playing at Highbury in front of 40,000 people in that stadium, in the old stadium, every now and then having a good cup run, I would choose it. But that's just my personal kind of taste.
and that's relevant, Tom, because like we're going through that now at Leyton Orient, right? We've obviously been a team that's say yo-yoed a little bit. Obviously, we had that one season in Division One, and we was a strong Division Two team. I'd say in my existence, we've been a Division Three, Division Four team, and obviously we dropped down to the conference with our recent struggles, but. We're doing really well, in the playoff places at League One. We just run Man City very close a couple of weeks ago in the FA Cup. Um, there's I would say a renewed optimism around the club, but we're looking for new investment. There was an article yesterday that they've confirmed, they signed a period of exclusivity with an American investment company, and given what we went through before, like everyone's a little bit wary, a little bit standoffish, and I'm definitely in the camp where I'm happy as we are, right? Because as well as we're doing right now and selling out, and obviously want more revenue, and we can't compete in Division One with the likes of Birmingham or Wrexham who we're playing tonight. Part of me doesn't want to move to a shiny identikit stadium, or if you look at say lower league teams or even higher up, Brighton near you move to a stadium, for instance, and Emirates is not really like that. So you've done well in that aspect, but most new stadiums are then built in retail parks away from high streets, away from pubs, away from restaurants, and they do lose their identity. Like if you look at a local club in Essex, like so you look at Colchester. Colchester had an old ramshackle ground in Layer Road, but it was in the heart of Colchester, right? It was surrounded by pubs and business and footfall. It's now, and most people would say it's not me speaking sort of badly of Colchester. It's one of the most depressive games of football you can ever go and watch. It's a big shiny stadium. They're in the lowest league. It's on a retail estate. There's nothing there. There's no pubs. You have to drive and walk for 20 minutes. Like,
Yeah.
I think people these days have lost that attachment to football clubs because there isn't it has changed massively. So you get so you said, and my parents used to go and watch a lot of London teams. I don't think, but as I grew up, people were more attached to their teams. But as it slipped away, I think you have found more people like a West Ham fan, for instance, 20, 30 years ago, their second team would be Leyton Orient, and they'd go and watch Leyton Orient play when West Ham are away. That's now, most people now will have a team, like yourself, for instance, and if Arsenal are away or you can't get there, then you'll go and watch a non-league team. And I think one of the good things about non-league now is I think the changing environment of the Premier League and sort of professional football has mean that at all levels non-league football attendances and exposure's gone through the roof. Like there's more people watching non-league football than ever. If you look at Harlow Town, for instance, they're in the lowest league that they've been in for years, step seven or whatever it is. They're getting crowds of 500 people. That's fantastic. So I think most people have gone through a little bit of change and also like cost, right? So how much does it cost to go and watch Eastbourne? In tenner, cheaper than that?
7.
£7, amazing value. You can hopefully get an entrance and a pint for a tenner. That's it's expensive now. Football to take your family and your child. So I think football in general is going through a bit of a change. How do you think, like your club, stadium aside, Tom? How do you think Arsenal has changed over the years? Like, obviously you moved stadium, but what are the things that you've noticed that are different to when you went as a boy? Good or bad? It doesn't. It's not a slant on Premier League football at all.
Sure, sure. I think firstly, you're right that compared to a lot of fans who have to see their ground changed, we didn't have to change our match day routine at all. We can literally still go to the same places before and after a game because it couldn't have been nearer, and we're really lucky about that. We didn't have to change postcode. I think that the connection these days with your Premier League club or my connection with Arsenal is sometimes despite the club, not because of it. Whereas as a kid and as a young man, and I used to live literally a 5-minute walk from the North Bank, it, you felt really connected to the club. And there were silly little things like when we got to a European final, Companies Cup finals and things like that, you'd go and queue physically, but you
Yeah.
knew on a Sunday morning and you knew you were going to get a ticket because there were everyone who had a season ticket would get to these games. There wasn't all this ballot because of so many seats being for corporate hospitality,
Yeah.
and and you didn't mind that. And on a Sunday morning, queuing under the South Bank to get your tickets for like the '94 Companies Cup final, things like that, and some of you would go in the queue and your other mates would be ringing trying to sort out flights,
Yeah.
and you get to conversations with fans and you spend the whole day doing it, but it was quite analog, but it felt like you and the club were one thing. They want you to get out to Copenhagen or wherever it was to that final. I feel like now,
That's a great point, Tom. By the way, just doing to it, that is a great point. I've never thought about it that way. In that way, that's a great point.
well, it's there are things like when I've got a season ticket. I only go a few times a season now, but that's out of choice because of family and Eastbourne Town and wanting to do other things. And my main sporting hobby is quite a time-consuming one. So, but the the season ticket I've got is a season ticket that we've had in one form or another in our family. It was my dad's and be mine for decades and decades. And I sit with a bunch of friends who all go to just about every game. But a few years ago, when one of my brothers wanted to let go of his ticket and give it to me, the club wouldn't let him. And as family, I mean, we've had these season tickets at Arsenal for absolutely decades, but the computer says no. So we just had to lose that season ticket or just him keep it. But keep sort of lending it out to people. I think the allegiance to the shirt, to the team, to the club you were raised loving remains, and it remains very solid. But at the same time, you know you're being overcharged. You do know you're being treated as a number. Interactions with the club do remind you of that, just the way you can't just walk up and have a chat and sort something out so easily. Um, but these things are not existential. It doesn't change your fundamental emotional experience of getting very excited about games, gutted when you lose certain games, having the commentary on in the background and pretending you're concentrating on what you're doing, wanting to do well. So it doesn't ruin it. It's certainly there's so much that's brilliant about the Premier League in terms of the match to match competitiveness. I think something that commentators and journalists often just overlook or I think just deliberately ignore in order to have some headlines is that even if Man City win 6 titles on the trot,
Yeah.
every single one of those titles has been unbelievably competitive. You know, you've had this golden age of them and Liverpool, the most unbelievably competitive titles down to a point. You've had, last season we failed by 2 points. And one of the things I love about the Premier League is there are less wealthy clubs like Bournemouth and Forest and Brighton and Fulham playing superb football, and no team in the top 4 or 5 can really go anywhere, with maybe one or two exceptions,
Mm.
thinking it's 3 points. We just need to add to our goal difference today. I think that's quite rare in top flight leagues, and I think that's brilliant. It's just that, you know, you have to pay a crazy amount of money to be there when these clubs are getting a huge amount of money elsewhere. And you know that a huge number of seats are hospitality seats, and then people wonder why the atmosphere isn't quite as crackling as it used to be, or as it is at a really competitive League One or Championship game. It's really not the fans' fault that a club decides to dish out a lot of tickets for people who really want to be there, but they are not fans and they're not going to make that noise and sort of create that tension. So there's good things and bad things. I think that it's just not a relationship with the club as a whole, because you can't afford to give your heart to something where you know that they don't love you back in the same way. There is an element supporting a Premier League club that it is slightly abusive, because you're going to keep taking bad behavior, which is what an abusive relationship is. But there's a huge amount of joy in it. And there is a feeling as a fan that I am a part of this club more than certain people running it, maybe, or certain people investing it. Definitely, sometimes with some players, you think, I know you're going to be gone in the bat of an eyelid, and I've always been here and I'll always be here. And obviously, there are fans who never miss a game home and away who are much, much bigger, better fans than I am. But I don't think you can. You, I would. I love Arsenal as much as ever, but your life changes, and the Premier League has got some fantastic things about it as a spectacle. But the way clubs run it and treat fans, you kind of have to step back a bit. Otherwise, you get, a bit wound up by it, to be honest.
Yeah, you get, and like I couldn't have actually put that better myself. Like I've never really thought it in the regards of like the old attachment of getting tickets and that, but I think everything you said there like sort of rings true with me. Like all my friends, for instance, they're always, if they stop going or they don't go as much, they'll always support an Arsenal or a Spurs or a West Ham. But I think, as you say, as you get older, I think you realise that time commitments, family, but also like is it the same club that you're supporting? And like some of the points that you're honed in on now, like I've always thought that, to your point, the Premier League was the most competitive in the world. Like as you say, anyone could beat anyone. I would say over the last 5 years, maybe that's not as true. And right now, if you had to ask me to watch a Premier League game or a Championship game, I'd probably watch a Championship game purely for that reason, because on their day, I think anyone who doesn't turn up gets beat, you know. But I think it's hard supporting a Premier League club these days because it's just such a well-oiled machine, right? It's a massive marketing sort of machine that I'm not so sure that someone like you and I that probably doesn't buy every shirt that comes out, that doesn't buy every merchandise, that doesn't do, everything around the club, that's maybe had the same shirt or scarf for 50 years. There is a massive sort of part of the Premier League now that at all London clubs, I used to think maybe it was just Fulham, and I think now everyone's the same, where there are a lot of day trippers from other countries that come over and want to see the players that are playing for their national teams, and they spend a lot of money. They buy expensive tickets. They go in the shop and spend hundreds of pounds. And sometimes I feel like, it's being angled towards them. And I had a great chat with, a family member of yours, Pat, and when I asked him about where he saw the Premier League going, one of the things that he did remark was that, the Super League will come back, and it will come back, and there will be games abroad, because right now, I think one of the reasons that push people to non-league football, or maybe, we've, I always go back to my club, Leighton Orient. We've had a couple of books wrote in the last 5, 10 years of people that have had Arsenal season tickets, Spurs season tickets, and for whatever reason, whether it priced out or the love has gone a little bit, and they've found themselves supporting Leighton Orient, local club to them, and it's easier on the wallet, and I think that is happening more frequently. And as I say, to get back to your book, I think that's why so many more people are going to watch non-league football. It doesn't mean that their love for their professional team will never be there anymore. It's just for whatever reason they're not going as regular, whether that's time, money, or whatever it is. But for you, Tom, you've got children. You've got children, correct?
Yeah.
Do they grow up with any attachment to non-league football, or in their eyes is it still like Arsenal to them? Because that's the one difference I think. Like even my son, like he'll say Arsenal Leighton Orient, and you get kids saying who or what kit's that, or I think that part of it hasn't changed though. And as I say, they might go through the journey that you and I have gone through, but as a kid, I don't see the attachment. It's very rare, right, that you'd see an attachment if it wasn't through family to a lower league team or even non-league. So, yeah,
Yeah,
you're
I think that's right. I think you're absolutely
Arsenal.
right. I mean, if you take if we take the boys to the Emirates, I mean, in a way, it's a bit like Christmas, isn't it?
Yeah,
When you've got kids, you really appreciate things
yeah,
through their eyes, and
yeah,
um, it's a real pleasure taking both boys to Arsenal because you just see that wide-eyed, jaw hit the floor
100%.
element of it for them, and actually it kind of makes me feel very affectionate, quite proud of my club of Arsenal,
Yeah,
and yeah, I think it's a great spectacle, and it stimulates them, and it's all good. And as you know, as everyone knows, I think witnessing in our case, it's me. Vic is not a football fan, although she's very sort of intrigued by it. But in terms of they witness me listening to the results, I'll tell them what's happened. We'll look at highlights together, and it just goes in. I mean, if they're interested, then they're going to have lots of opportunity to watch football at both levels, to play football. Um, I don't actually force it or kind of bring it into them any more than sort of everything else, like going to the skate park, riding a bike, swimming lessons. It's just all part of it, and they're both interested in the results. They're both asking about results. And have loved their trip so far to Arsenal. My youngest has been to Eastbourne with me a couple of times, and yeah, it's somewhere to skip about,
You
and
know nothing
stuff's
about.
going on and the chips are decent. And I kind of, I love all that. That's like these things kind of like permeate very slowly, don't they?
Yeah, it's a hard sell though, isn't it? Tom, is
Yeah,
what you say.
absolutely.
Like
It's got
they've
anything.
got the glitz and glamour of Arsenal, but like to them, they're not gonna realise, what they're getting at Eastbourne, for instance, as I say, until they've probably gone through our journey. Like I remember I used to have to go to Barcelona a lot for work and I'd always take the family and I used to take Bertie when Messi was in his pomp. And I remember one game he scored a hat trick, and Suarez scored this unbelievable back heel. And we still talk about it now against Mallorca. And I remember walking out with my father-in-law and was like, "Well, I can't ever take him to any Leyton Orient games again." I said because I might as well not bother. Like he seemed one of the best games that you could ever see. So it's a much harder sell. But as you say, I think the fun aspect of that non-league environment is there's always a game going on, right? So you take your younger children, and obviously when they're younger and they've got to sit in the seat, I sometimes found that their interest would wane, right? After they've kicked off and it's into the game and they might have eaten the food that they've got. Sometimes that interest could wane. But what I do love about non-league football for the kids is there's always someone there with a ball. So
Yeah,
you turn up at these games, and especially if in the setting of Eastbourne where there's a cricket ground there and other things sort of surrounding the ground, like there's always someone having a kick about. So they I think they get their enjoyment through that, like meeting up with other people and just having a kick around, and the game kind of become secondary, right? I think that's the way that, and to me, that's how I remember. Like when me and Pat spoke about Harlow, like I always remember at Harlow there was this big grass bank, and at the top of this grass bank there was this random goal, just one goal frame, and we'd go up the hill and everyone would play on there, and it's kind of the game was really irrelevant, but you were still going to watch Harlow, if you know what I mean.
yeah, yeah. I think that's right. And I think the thing I see a lot of, I mean, I guess our ambition as parents is that once our kids are sort of well into their teens, that they still want to talk to you and hopefully even hang out with you a bit. And,
Yeah.
if, you know, if when the boys are like, that age, 14, 15, 16 onwards, every now and then they fancy the idea of an afternoon at Eastbourne Town and you can have a pint together or a cup of tea together. I think that's when it comes into its own. And I see a lot of teenagers turning up at Eastbourne in a group. It's what you refer to, it's right in the middle of town. I mean, it's right there. And kids out. It's a great feeling when you're out of school at the weekend, when you're in your teens and you're old enough to just meet up independently with your friends. And some of them clearly just waft into the ground to watch a bit. And it is where the price of a ticket there is something for the club to be really proud about, because it means those people can just wander in and some of them will get really involved. Obviously, some of them will be playing for the under 18s or the under 21s, but I think there's an age, and like you say, it's probably not um, primary school age where it comes into its own.
Yeah,
Um,
as I say,
you know, one
it's
of the things I did want to say about it is, and when one of the amazing strengths, when we're talking about, the scale of Premier League clubs obviously brings, as an entertainment, brings something pretty stunning. There is an absolute kind of insatiable desire to grow for any big organization and modern organization. And that desire to grow means that Pat is absolutely right. And he knows football better than anyone I know, that we will, an FA Cup final will take place in the States. Certain games will happen. The European Super League, I mean, I kind of feel that Arsenal are taking part in one this season. It's all those things will inevitably happen. Um, Unfortunately, in the same way that, from a footballing point of view, rather than thinking about a brand and an investment, from a footballing point of view, it is totally laughable that you ever consider holding the greatest football tournament on the planet, the World Cup,
yeah,
in Qatar, in Saudi Arabia. You don't do it unless You are just growing a brand. Everyone knows that. People have just got bored of arguing the toss about it because we know what's happening. And I think that's why you sort of hunker down on your relationship with your professional team. You know, you love the shirt, you love the players that you take to and that kind of stay or that have come through, and it's why you look for different things. And one of the things you find in non-league football clubs, because there's no money in it, is you've got all these organizations, and as you know, there's hundreds of non-league football clubs across the pyramid, and it's full of people who know their communities inside out, people to whom giving huge amounts of their time for free is second nature to them. They do it all the time, otherwise none of these clubs would exist. And they're providing this thing, football, local football, which is phenomenally good for people's physical health and mental well-being. It brings people together socially. It gives meaning and structure to a lot of people's lives. And I think the biggest problem I've got with the Premier League is that there are some institutions in this country which are full of amazing people, like non-league footballers, the NHS, state education, but there's just not enough money. There's not enough resources. There's not enough money for them to be able to do their job brilliantly. But in football, there's enough money. If you just took football in this country and you distributed it more equally, the Premier League would still be the Premier League. They'd still be doing brilliantly. They still have big, shiny stadiums. The players might be having to try and live off 80 grand a week instead of 200 grand a week, or 30 grand a week instead of 80 grand a week. But there is wealth. There is enough money in football for every level, lower league football and non-league football, to be striving, for us to be buying back playing fields, doing up small stadiums. And it is an infrastructure that is ready made and existing, and people are working. You know, non-league football clubs like Eastbourne Town are held together by people who turn up every day and give their time to it. And we could have this unbelievable, thriving four professional leagues and then pyramid of non-league, plus then all the kids' youth football that all the non-league clubs have or would like to have if they just had a bit more resources. We've got the money to pay for it all, but we've got this unbelievable top heavy wealth, this ridiculous amount of money going into players' wages. And the players didn't invent that. You
No.
know, if 20 years ago or 30 years ago, or when the first really obscenely big TV deal came in, if the players had been told we're going to have a cap, you will never earn more than £100,000 a week,
Yeah.
no player would have, because 100 grand a week is obscene.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
we've got the wealth and we've got this incredible infrastructure in non-league football. And that's the only thing that sort of makes me, cross about it all, because it's ready made. And the people running non-league football they are just totally wired to give to society, to give to their community.
Yeah, it is a big issue, but as you say, the non-league pyramid is probably the greatest in the world. What would you say, Tom, as we look to wrap this up? What would you say is three things that you've grown to love the most about non-league football?
Um, you touched on one of them, being really close to the pitch,
Yeah.
where you're watching really good football. I mean, these guys are really good footballers. We're in the eighth tier now, I guess, the Isthmian League. And, these are good competitive matches with very, very good footballers being coached by very talented managers. So being close to that, being close to the pitch, I love. I really like about, I mean, I like England and I like my landscapes. I like the fact that going around on league just takes you to these great places. So if you follow Eastbourne Town Football Club in the previous decade when we've been in the, Southern Combination, you go to places like Loxwood FC, which is a really good pitch in the middle of nowhere, and it's just surrounded by countryside, by these huge kind of evergreen trees on one side. It is in the middle of nowhere. There's this massive tree you have to kind of walk around to walk out onto the pitch. Beautiful. Then you're at somewhere like Lewes.
Lovely stadium.
Lovely stadium, best stadium I ever played in, and the pitch I ever played on. And what a football club! I mean, the ethos of Lewes FC, the women's team and the men's team is it gives you absolute hope for football and its future, for gender equality. You go to places like that. In the cup earlier this season, we had a very unsuccessful trip up to Margate. To me, Margate FC, and I know Pat's got some very good stories about Margate. It's a time warp. I mean, it's like going back to the 70s, and I mean that in a good way. So the second thing I love is it just takes you to these little nooks and crannies of the country, and some really great grounds and stadiums. Um, I suppose the third thing I'd say is just really fundamental thing that made me absolutely love football again because of the community side to it, the people around it, picking up a cup of tea, having a nice conversation with the people serving you a cup of tea, nodding and saying hello to a few people whilst take your place wherever you want to stand. It just makes you feel good inside.
Yeah, and I agree with all that. And also, as I've always said, I don't think non-league gets the dues it deserves for the quality on the pitch. One of the things of the money of the Premier League is a lot of players have filtered down the pyramid, and the standard even of the conference now is easily, especially top half as good as that League Two. What would you say, Tom? Is there anything that you miss going to Arsenal regularly?
No, look, I'd say my journey with Arsenal has been, I mean, you asked about it specifically. You're absolutely right. Leaving Highbury definitely was a bit of a sort of, it's like a wind, being a bit winded,
Yeah,
thinking, God, but I think, every club and set of fans struggle when they're firstly in a new stadium. Really interesting seeing the images this morning of the new Everton ground. It looks absolutely sensational. I like Everton as a club. I hope it works well for them, but it takes a while. It takes a while for people to find their noise and to. So there's a bit of that, but I definitely felt. I mean, there's a personal aspect for me because my dad and my brother are no longer with me, and I just associate Highbury with them. So I
yeah,
think leaving Highbury was quite a personal wrench. But that said, having gone less for a while, whilst I was spending much more time going to non-league football, and now beginning to take the boys, I love going. So I think you just have to be very positive. The shirt is still the same. I do. We have the luxury right now of having a manager who really gets it and gets us. He really wants to deliver for the fans. I think he loves the club, and I don't. I would love to win the title, but I don't care if we don't win the title. Whilst we've got great young players coming through and a manager who does the right things for the fans, he makes sure that we are, we're kind of part of it. I'm very happy with that, and yeah, you just have to move on and let the. I don't like walking past the old ground. I tend never to do that. But that's just the nostalgia in me. There's loads of good things happening at Arsenal, but it's in the modern world. It's in the modern world where certain things are just as they are.
no, I agree. Lastly, Tom, what would you say to any person that maybe is a little bit um, sort of going through a period where they're not sure, they've got the love for their Premier League team or the time or, money, money might not be the same as what they've always earned, for instance. What would you say to anyone that was looking to maybe go and watch a non-league game? What could you say to them right now?
Well, you touched on the fact that there are, and you'll know full well, there are a whole band of people out there who go to non-league a lot, but
Yeah.
they don't support the club. They just go to different non-league grounds
Groundhoppers, yeah.
and the groundhoppers. And quite two or three people when I was doing the book at Eastbourne Town said that they were groundhoppers and then they arrived at Eastbourne Town. One of them, Kev in particular, just said, I used to go to a different ground every week, came to Eastbourne a couple of times because I liked it. And after one game, I had the chairman, David Jenkins, come up to me and say, "Oh, I've seen you here before. Who are you? I'm David," and introduce himself. And he never left, and he's been supporting Eastbourne Town ever since. But there is this unbelievable world of non-league football out there. And if you're a bit disillusioned or if you're a Tottenham fan and just given up, go and watch some non-league football. And I just can't imagine you won't want to go back.
No. And then lastly, Tom, it's a fantastic book. I love, obviously, there's a story behind it, and that they'll find that out. I love the front cover of the goalie coach. But where can people buy a copy of the book?
Yeah, it's called Fair Game, and it's available from all normal bookstores. Just go online, or you have to order it. It won't be on the shelves, but every bookshop.org is the Amazon version of independent booksellers, and it's a really good. It works just like Amazon, but you're supporting independent bookshops if you buy through bookshop.org. But you can buy the Amazon, Waterstones, Foyles, all the WH Smiths, all the normal places. Thank you.
Lovely. I've really enjoyed our chat. You've actually made me think about a few things in a different way. I love the attachment about the old way of queuing for tickets, and even if I think about Orient queuing for certain games for tickets and getting that tickets, you're made up and your mates are going, you're ringing in the queue. But what I would say is it's a beautiful book. I have an office, and in my office I have a number of books, and your book Fair Game is now pride of place. There's beautiful photos. As I say, I love the front cover. I think it epitomizes everything about non-league. So I really want to appreciate. I want to say thank you, and really appreciate you taking the time today. I know you're a very busy man with lots of projects on, but yeah, for anyone who's looking for a book or a gift for someone, amazing photos, really beautiful. And Tom, thank you for your time, and hopefully we'll get to speak again soon.
Thanks a lot, Christian. It's a really great podcast, and thanks for having me on.
Thanks, Tom.
Cheers, mate.